okay, I could study one or two reptiles seriously, or the flora of Ohio, which is all 2,600 species. And my brain was just like, that's cool.
Welcome, adventurers! In today's journey, we learn more about Tom Arbor, otherwise known as Two Turtle Tom. Topics discussed include the origin of his nickname, his career path, all things turtles, and much more. Buckle up! This adventure begins now. All right, so this is a new episode of the Reptile Show Reporter podcast. Today's guest is Tom Arbor, also known as Two Turtle Tom. I understand that's a New Jersey type nickname. Well, tell us about that.
Apparently, way back in graduate school, I was telling one of my friends who came out to Miami University in Ohio from New Jersey about my tortoises that I had in my apartment.
Mhm.
And he just looked at me and he's like, Two Turtle Tom. What's your name? Two Turtle Tom. I like that. We're going to call you Two Turtle Tom.
And it stuck, huh? How long ago was that? A couple years ago, huh?
A bit. Like decades.
Okay.
2 decades.
It's all right.
And, I've used that for a long time on the Tortoise Forum.
Hmm?
I don't know if you've ever been to that website, but it's I just
have, but where do
yeah,
you
it's
find that?
tortoiseforum.org, I think. Yeah, tortoiseforum.org. So it was always my handle there,
Hmm?
and it was just with a 2
Hmm?
and then Turtle Tom, but I needed to change for the YouTube channel that I have.
Hmm?
It used to be called Hingeback Tortoise Central, and it was just too geeky sounding. And I'm like, man, what if I just called my channel Two Turtle Tom? I wonder if people would resonate more with that. And sure enough, I made that change late last summer, and my channel's really taken off. And I get way more subscribers now that it's just more general. I
Hmm?
still do the same kind of video. All I did was change the name, and I'm seeing a lot more success.
That's interesting because I changed the name of Exotic Pet Adventures to Reptile Show Provider or Reporter,
Yeah.
and on Instagram, 3 or 4 months of Exotic Pet Adventures, I got a few likes, I guess, or follows on
Follows.
Instagram. On Instagram, 2 weeks, I got twice as many follows as I had in the entire 3 or 4 months of Exotic Pet Adventures. And I'm like, this is a no-brainer. I need to change it. But it's weird how a name can make a whole big difference in social media, where it's the name is so important, and it doesn't make your content's the same, everything else the same. You're the same person. I didn't get a new nose. I just changed the name, and I became more popular. And I'm just like, this doesn't make any sense. All
That's
right,
exciting.
yeah.
Names
So
are important, and we can't change our own name.
mm,
We can if we really want to.
and but
Make your parents mad when you do
mm,
that.
yes, they become upset at least a little bit, especially when they named you after somebody or named you for
Yeah.
somebody. Or when did we officially meet, Tom? Like, not in person. I mean, did we meet
Yeah.
online? Did we meet at the show in
So,
Medina, or did we actually
um,
meet online?
so when I lived in Columbus, I
Mm,
think I was visiting my parents. They live just down the road from where I live now, and we went out to the Medina show.
mm,
And we were walking around, and my kids are pretty independent. And Brody, who was probably like 9 at the time, I want to say, had come up to this table with a person that had these really interesting looking chameleons.
mm-hmm.
And that person was talking to him, and Brody and I just kind of like nodded my head, like, "Hey, Brody, how you doing?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, this guy, he told me all about this thing called the Chameleon Academy," and I'm like, "Oh, that's really cool." And I don't even think I said anything to you at that moment. I'm just like, "Hey, yeah, cool chameleons. Let's go to the next table."
Mm-hmm.
And so that was like the first time, and then I found Bill
Mhm.
Well, I had the Chameleon Academy in the back of my head.
Mhm.
Um, and then we moved to Northeast Ohio. I started working for Holden Forests and Gardens, and we're two campuses, the Holden Arboretum, where we did a nice walk together.
Mhm.
But we also have another campus called the Cleveland Botanical Garden. We have glass
Mhm.
houses there. We have an animal care specialist, and we have chameleons there because we actually have a Madagascar glass house with plants from Madagascar. And I'm like, man, these are really cool. I remember this Chameleon Academy thing that Brody picked up a piece of paper from the reptile show from that guy, which was you.
Yes, of
And
course. And so I was
yeah,
advertising for Bill because I was too lazy
yes,
to make my own stuff, and
yes,
not. But it just I couldn't make it any better. So why not? You know. And
yeah.
I actually had one of his cages, one of his
Oh,
dragon strand cages on my table. I don't know if I had it by then or not at that time, but I had was advertising his cage and just all my chameleons. But go ahead, you're speaking
yeah.
about the.
No, so I looked up the Chameleon Academy, found the podcast, I started listening, and then this person named Sean was like a guest. And I'm like, I wonder if that's the same person. And then when you I was following Bill a year ago and then saw that he was on your show. And I'm like, that is the guy. That is
Mhm.
the guy that Brody met, and you obviously spent some time talking with him. And Brody was really impressed with chameleons, and he was really impressed with you and the educational materials that you had. And I was just getting back into turtles and tortoises then. I'd been out of the reptile game for like 25 years, like com- with a big collection of everything, right? So when I left, chameleons were throwaways, really, right? You'd get them and they might last 6 months or a year, and that was pretty
Mhm.
much it. So when I found out about the Chameleon Academy that people had figured them out, I was like,
Mhm.
"Ooh, this is really cool. This is exciting. Maybe I can get into chameleons. We have them at work." And I listened to every podcast Bill had and then started watching your weekly show.
Mhm. Wow, that's an interesting story, and it actually was
Isn't
Bill's
it?
weekly show until it
Yeah.
evolved into my show. So I think this whole thing was planned from the very beginning. Um, I don't know if he plants a bunch of seeds and then sees who grows and weeds out all the stuff around and lets the things grow, or if he, if he's how much he's doing or how much he knows when he starts. But he definitely plants seeds, lets them grows, and he seems to enjoy that, so I guess he's a gardener, and I just happen to be his plant. So, but being a plant guy
Definitely.
yourself, I guess
Yeah.
that I mean, reptiles are your love, but your job is plant guy. So, I mean, I
Yeah.
guess that's the what it is. So,
Yeah. I mean, it was, I was going to college right during the Steve Irwin era, and everybody wanted to be a herpetologist
hmm
in the late 90s, early 2000s.
hmm
And to be a herpetologist professionally, I also realized I was probably going to have to work with venomous reptiles.
yep,
And, I thought about being a zookeeper, and I am really interested in natural places
hmm
and what makes a natural place different from another natural place.
hmm
And the most obvious thing is the vegetation, right? So I just really got interested in vegetation and plant ecology, and then I realized how many plants there are. Literally, we have 2,600 different species just in Ohio. That includes non-natives that you can learn and explore, and everywhere you go is different. So for me, okay, I could study one or two reptiles seriously, or the flora of Ohio, which is all 2,600 species. And my brain was just like, that's cool. That's a lot of diversity. I can learn all of those plants and explore the state. So that's what I did. I
Mhm.
kind of switched over to plants, and then I worked for the Ohio Department of Natural Resources for over 20 years. And during the pandemic, we relocated to Northeast Ohio, and I found Holden Forest and Gardens, and I'm now our curator of living collections there at both campuses, which means I am ultimately responsible for obtaining new plants for our collections. And we have over 17,000 plants, trees, and groups of plants that we track individually.
Wow.
So I'd always been interested in reptiles and amphibians, like from a kid. I'm gonna have a video on my YouTube channel this weekend where I actually interviewed my parents a little bit about, like, because I
Wow,
had,
they're good sports. I don't
yeah,
think my parents
they
were ever
didn't really
doing that
know it
though.
was happening. They didn't know it was happening. It was like, hey, I'm gonna film this and ask you questions. Okay, start. Um, but I we went to Maine last week, and so I dropped off a turtle with my mom, a Greek tortoise baby, so she could watch it. And she took care of it for me. And so when I went to pick it up, I'm like, yeah, let's just film some questions and answers here. And like, my first question was, so did you think when I was a kid that like 30 years later you would be babysitting my tortoises? Jesus,
Not the
that's
grandbabies, but the
that's
tortoises.
yeah, that's how we started. Now she watches the grandbabies too, but my parents were pretty supportive of my hobby, and by the time I got into high school, I had a pretty good sized, diverse collection that was too big for me to handle, quite honestly. And I was probably, well, I was definitely more interested in the acquisition and the collection and the diversity. Um, and so, that's what was so cool about plants. I could just go places and the
You
plants
can
don't
see them.
move. You don't have to find them, and you can learn about, the 50 to 60 different species of sedges that have slight differences and characters, but you don't need to keep them in captivity to really see them and have them be cool. They don't run away. You don't have to go at a certain time of day. So kind of transitioned to plants as a college student and still kept hingeback tortoises.
Mhm.
I had two through 2018. Those were my only two tortoises for like 18 years. And then in 2018, I got a new job, needed something a little different to do as a hobby. And I'm like, you know what? I've always wanted to breed hingebacks. Let me get into this reptile stuff. I found Camp Kennan, his
Mhm.
YouTube channel, and I was like, don't let me watch this because
Yeah, I
this is
agree.
this is real, this is
That stuff is
dangerous.
dangerous. Yes, all those channels like that are very dangerous.
And of course now I'm doing my own, but it's like, okay, this is like when I was 14, this is my dream to have like a turtle or tortoise sanctuary. So finding that, I knew it was kind of over, quite honestly. And my wife is like, wow, like you didn't really like reptiles when we got married.
You're like, little did you know.
um, but when I got back in, I really just focused on the hingeback species that I had been keeping for a long time, and I have been really successful breeding those two species. And um, I have a few miscellaneous things, and the kids have some pets that diversifies what we're interested in. But my main focus is the production of two species of hingeback tortoises from West Africa.
Wow. Yes, my wife bought me my first iguana 30
There,
something years ago.
there you
And
go.
so I was already kind of into reptiles at the time, but she bought my first iguana. I think I've said the story multiple times on different podcasts, but I was actually at the University of Toledo when I was in the
Yeah.
Parks Power dorm, and she bought me this, and I kept it under my head fish, and I had a tank and the stand, and I kept it. I kept the lights and the heat and everything under the stand, so it was able to roam around and have a good time. That was the end of it for me. That was a downhill spiral until we got kids, and then I reduced my numbers, and then started to get a few more things, but then I went crazy. I don't know, 5 or 10 years ago, I started doing chameleons, and then I like I told you, I met Bill, and this is
Yeah.
kind of like it's and like you said, plants. You can't have chameleons without plants. So
Yeah.
now I know like 30 different species of plants. I didn't know a pothos from a tree. I couldn't tell the difference. I would have thought, does this leaf from a tree or is it from a pothos? And you get into plants, and then you get into bugs because you got to feed them the bugs, and then you get to breeding the bugs. And a few years ago we did silkworms because my kids loved silkworms, and so you get into all this different stuff, and it's just a trip. And then you start to learn about the country where the pets are from. So I know a lot more about Africa than I ever used to know. I know a lot more about Europe, South America. Unfortunately, I haven't picked a continent where I like my pets from. So tell me about what is your goal for Two Turtle Tom?
Really, it's to promote better turtle and tortoise care.
Mhm.
I don't work with common tortoise species,
Mhm.
but what I try to do is show what I do and how that can relate to other species. Uh, I am doing three kinds of content right now. I have a weekly video, long form. I'm doing shorts or vertical content.
Mhm.
And then I started a live,
Mhm.
really, after you guys. And it
So
was very,
this is
very
all Bill's
organic.
fault.
Yeah. Um,
This
and I
devolves
mean,
down to being Bill's fault, so that we always got to remember that.
totally. So, if the listener is so inclined, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, at 8 o'clock Eastern, there's a show. Bill's on Tuesday on Instagram. Sean's Wednesday. I'm Thursday. What I do, I bring in a species specialist or someone that has a lot of experience working with a particular species, and we take a deep dive into the care and husbandry of that species. So even though I work with like 2, 3 species, I can learn about all of these other species, and I don't need to have them, right? Um, and I can't have everyone I talk about each week. Um,
I keep
so
trying not to have
yeah,
everything I talk about each
yeah,
week, but I have too many kids and too many things that I'm at, too
yeah.
much
There you
access.
go.
But yes, I hear you.
Yeah. So that is the goal. Originally, when I called my channel Hingeback Tortoise Central, the goal was to educate people about hingeback tortoises. But that's really niched down. There's not many people that keep hingeback tortoises. If you're at a reptile show, you might see one, and they're quite rare when it comes to tortoises in the hobby. They're out there. If you know where to get them, you can get them, but they're not commonly sold in pet stores, and they're just really obscure. So that also was part of the name change reason. I had been looking for something else, and Turtle Tom, let's bring that back.
So, how many species of turtles now? Now, for those who don't know, tortoises are a part of the turtles. It's not. Is it family? What is it? Mhm.
That is the order.
Mhm.
You have the squamates. That's another order in reptiles. That is your snakes and lizards. So snakes and lizards are in the same order,
Mhm.
and the crocodilians are in the other order, and that is how they're kind of separated. So you have all turtles and tortoises are in the order Testudinata or Calanida,
Mhm.
and within those orders, within that order, you have families
Mm-hmm.
of turtles. The tortoises are one family.
Mm-hmm.
The soft-shelled turtles are one family. The Asian pond turtles are one family. The side neck turtles are really a super family. So that's how you separate turtles by family. And all turtles and tortoises are in the order, and we can call them all turtles, but there's one family, tortoises.
What makes a tortoise rather than a
Yeah, so,
turtle? Not that they're on land, because there's land turtles. It's
yeah.
their
So
elephantine like feet, or
yeah, the tortoises have this characteristic of their back legs. That's one of the characters, and that is one of the main differences of a tortoise. There's no other turtles that have these back rear legs that look like an elephant's rear leg. Just it's really really interesting. Very flat foot. Their front legs are often very club like, and they have very small feet, and they're very bulky. They don't really have a foot, so it's almost all leg. They typically have very high dome shells, but not all of them. And there's lots of different habitats they live in, but for the most part, they are living on land.
Mhm.
But there are some turtles in other families that also live on land, like box turtles. Box turtles are not related to tortoises. They're more closely related to painted turtles and sliders. So I've always loved tortoises. They were more expensive, right? So I started with turtles. But for me, there's just something very special about a tortoise that I love. I think they're very approachable. They're very calm. Sometimes they can act a little crazy. Typically, they're fairly gentle. And I just have always loved that.
I have never met someone who didn't like tortoises, that hated tortoises.
Yeah.
You get the people who hate snakes, you get the people who hate lizards, mice, and all these different. But I've never met someone who hated tortoises.
Yeah.
Even turtles, there might be someone who's, snapping turtles.
Snapping turtles, soft shell
People are not
turtles can
afraid
be
of, right? Yeah.
weird, but
But no one's ever. Have you ever met someone who didn't like tortoises?
yeah, I mean, for whatever reason, we just have this affinity for them, and it's so interesting to me. It would be such an interesting, like, sociology question to research. I wonder if anybody's done that. It's just, it's bizarre, and that's part of the problem, right? There are these slow moving animals that people love, so they see one, a tortoise or a box turtle, and they take them home and they keep them as pets, and they're resilient.
Mm-hmm.
They'll live in your backyard for decades, and that's a problem. So
Yes, because people don't know how to well to treat them, and they live under almost any condition.
It's totally true. They can endure
Mm-hmm.
an amazing amount of stress. They can go for months without eating. They don't, some species. Many species can go a long time without any water, weeks. That's not going to be good for them, but they can do it. And so they're built to withstand stress and wait it out until their preferred environmental conditions come back. The drought is over, rain comes back, the plants grow, food's available, the tortoise is happy, and it'll gain that weight back. But yeah, they can endure an incredible amount of stress. And that's why we see in the pet trade some of these animals that just look horrible, right? They're just awful metabolic bone disease, awful pyramiding, just shells that are lumpy and bumpy and disfigured and disformed. It can get pretty nasty, and a tortoise can live like that for a long time. Usually they don't live as long as a good healthy tortoise, but 10, 20 years they can survive being fed just spinach or watermelon. They're not
Yeah.
going to look very good, but
Now
they can do
turtles
it.
don't live as long as tortoises. Tortoises live on like in the almost 100-year range, 75 to 150 or whatever. But
Yeah.
turtles are more in the half century, or is it
I mean,
vary by species?
it's hard. It's really hard to generalize. Turtles and tortoises are long-lived animals, right?
Mhm.
Nobody quite knows how long some of these tortoises live, just because they haven't been kept. The giant tortoises, people were keeping them as pets and curiosities. I mean, what better thing to bring back from a tropical island than this giant tortoise that can easily survive the trip? And so we know how old they are because people have been documenting their care for over 100 years. But the smaller tortoises, nobody's been documenting that. So I have tortoises that I've had for 23 years. I've been given tortoises that have been in captivity for 30 years and were adults when they came into the country. So they could be decades and decades old. We just don't know for some of these smaller species. But I think the most important thing, if you buy any turtle and tortoise, it's not a pet that is going to just die in a year or two, like a hamster or something like that.
My,
You are committing to a lifelong pet.
yes.
I've had an animal since I was 20. I got my oldest, so that's decades. My cousin, we gave her a red-eared slider when she was 12. Um, she's married and has kids that are almost teenagers, and the turtle is still a part of that family. Literally, like 35 years later. That's a red-eared slider.
Mhm. Very common, unfortunately, at the rescues, at least the local rescue. There's lots and lots of red-eared slider there.
It's an edge of range species for us. And so there was a remnant population of red-eared sliders in these ponds along the Scioto River south of Columbus. So maybe you had a natural population of red-eared sliders in Ohio, maybe 1,000 animals. I mean, we're talking about like a couple ponds that animals were found in late 1800s, early 1900s, before the pet trade started. So that was the extent of their nativity in Ohio. They were pretty rare, but because of that, they're still considered a native species. And when Ohio enacted new legislation for reptile keeping in 2000, they were a native species, and that required you to have a permit. Well, it's not a permit; it's a license. And so the big box stores stopped selling red-eared sliders and switched to yellow-bellied sliders. So that's what you see in a lot of pet stores. If they're like an under the radar kind of pet store, you'll see red-eared sliders because they just don't know. You can't sell them.
That's unfortunate, but it's screwy how things happen. That you think the whole history behind it. You never know it. You don't understand, and whether it's a native species or not. I've gotten into long talks with people about what does native mean, and it's like a definition. When do you drop the line at this is
Yeah.
when native started? Was it
Yeah.
100 years ago? Was it 1,000 years ago? Was it 10 million years ago? Nothing
Yep.
was native. Dinosaurs were native. So, but you get to that point. You're like, what are we worried about? All these native things, and are they really native? And did they start here? And how do how do things go? Now, invasive, I think is a lot more difficult and a lot more problematic, and things we have to worry about. Invasive species that damage all the other species that are there. That's a big problem, and that's something I could easily understand. But native versus non-native, it's hard to tell. All right, so let's get back to the reptile shows. Since
Yeah.
this is the reptile show reporter.
That's where we met.
All right. Where
First
did
time.
you get your first reptile show?
So I grew up in Northeast Ohio, and so my first show was the Cleveland show, but when it was run by NOAA.
Mhm.
So back then it was the Northern Ohio Association of Herpetologists. and my parents took me to the first set of shows, and I do not remember where those were. Um, and then they switched to the west side somewhere, like Brook Park or something like that. By that point, I could drive, so you're probably like 1994, maybe. But yeah, that was my first show. I'd go to it. I remember a guy was like licensed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. He had bog turtles at the show. I remember the first time I saw a bearded dragon in my life was at that show, and these animals I think had come in from Germany. We'd never seen them. I mean, like to see it, this lizard you'd never seen, and they were tame and big. It was just incredible. A lot of colubrids back then.
Mm-hmm.
But those shows were all captive bred. And I don't know when they ended. And I think the NOAA organization is not around anymore.
I have not heard of it. So
yeah, see, you haven't even heard of NOAA.
I mean, I've heard of it. I knew I remember NOAA, but yeah. I actually was part of the one that was out in the Toledo area, which is Northwest Ohio. And I was the Northwest Ohio Herpetology Society, whatever it was.
I went to the Toledo Reptile Collectors Expo about 3 months ago, and it was a real small show.
Where was that?
So it was in a Knights of Columbus hall. Okay. And I was coming back from Michigan, and I'm like, you know what? I just saw a reptile show ad this morning on Facebook, and so I'll stop in. And so we saw, I was there by myself. I saw my friend Seth Hurst, who has made cages for both of us, Hurst Reptiles. He was there, and he said, this is the best show. I'm like, why? It's tiny. Because I don't have as much competition, and I sell a ton of animals. So I had never really thought about it from the vendor's perspective like that. But I mean, in general, that Northern Ohio show was a good show. But at that time, the All Ohio Reptile Show was the show to go to. NOAA had their show maybe twice a year. Don Hamper started the All Ohio Reptile Show, and it was monthly. And that was the show that I dreamed of going to, but never really made it until I actually moved to Columbus. But that one was famous. So you had people from all over Ohio coming to that show. Personally, I think Don Hamper's show, he set the model 20 years ago for what shows in Ohio are. And Ohio has 10 million people. We're a very regional state. We don't say we're from Ohio. We say we're from Northeast Ohio or Central Ohio or Southwest Ohio or Northwest Ohio. And all of these communities are pretty regionalized. So what we have is a lot of frequent regional shows. And I think they developed because we have a lot of breeders here, and they couldn't get into the big shows. And those people saw the demand for another show. And so they've created all of these shows. But what we don't have is a big show, right? So we don't have a Tinley. We don't have a Daytona. We don't have the Phoenix Reptile Show, which I go to as a part of the Turtle and Tortoise Preservation Group meetings. And that's what we're missing. It's like the weekend before Thanksgiving. And so you can get in and get out before the big travel starts. But that show draws people from all over the country. Like Josh's Frogs goes to that show from Michigan, right? But you'll never see Josh's Frogs at a show in Ohio, for example.
Nope.
So I think that's what we're missing. So today I want to create a show, Sean.
Okay. You mean a big one or a little one?
Yeah, I think Ohio needs a big show. Yes, the little shows are great, but let's create a big once a year show that draws people from all over the country, in a really big venue, and everybody that goes to all the shows can come to this show,
Mhm.
and we can bring in people from all over the country. That's kind of my dream. We've got a lot of reptile buyers here in this state, and I don't want to drive to Chicago for a big show. Let's bring them here.
But Chicago is not much further than Cincinnati. So I guess it depends on where in Ohio you're going to put the
Yeah.
show. Are you going to put it in Columbus? Is that where you go?
So I would have to break out, do a market analysis and figure that out.
Okay. Are you going to do something cool, like have it start later and go later, so us people who don't wake up early in the morning, or the vendors who don't want to get up at 4:00 in the morning to drive there, can actually set up from 8 to 12 and do the show from 12 to 8 or whatever?
It's a 2-day show.
Okay.
We don't have 2-day shows in Ohio.
No, we don't.
We only have day shows, and so people from far away aren't going to come to Ohio for a day show. And so, yeah, that's what you need. You need to have a big show that's multiple days to really draw the people in. And yeah, we have a lot of little shows, but man, don't have that big one. And I think there's a lot of potential. And maybe it's the opportunity to kind of reimagine what a reptile show is. I'll have to think about that a little bit more, but
so now what you've done is created the need for a repeat podcast. It's like a part 2 of this podcast.
There you go.
We can talk about the ideal reptile show, or I can bring you on the live show and you could think about even though you're already there each week, but on the chat, but we could bring you on and we could have you talk about the ideal reptile show. What does that mean? And cool. Maybe it's just an ideal reptile show with an Ohio feel to it, but in the sense that you're going to plant it in Ohio, and make it an ideal show. But yeah, this is starting to feel like talking to Bill. Kind of get these, he floats these ideas like you need to get a hedgehog because I can't own them.
Thinking out of the box, but maybe it's a conference and a show. Maybe it's a herpetoculture conference and a show. There's right now there's more talk about herpetoculture and I think we're in the golden age of herpetoculture right now, with the Reptile Show Reporter and the Chameleon Academy podcast and the Animals at Home Network, right? So obviously, there's things like what you're going to go down to in Florida in September. I think that's
Animal Con, right? Yeah,
and that's I think an example of a new concept that is being experimented with. It's not a reptile show. It's a show of people, really. It's the creators, the animal creators show. They're the stars, right? And I just think I think we're professionalizing and establishing herpetoculture as a thing that is real. And we're not just a bunch of people with creepy crawlies in our basement. We're that too. but we're not just that. I don't know. And so how do we as a community of herpetoculturists unite and share ideas across species? One of the things I love about the Chameleon Academy is Bill's vision for building a community. And that's one of the main reasons I listen to the show, is not to learn about chameleons. It's to learn how Bill communicates chameleon husbandry to his community, and how he builds that community and nurtures it and grows it through his podcast. And we work with different species. We kind of have little niches, but we have a lot in common across the different species, and reptile shows bring us all together. And we talk, but casual conversations, can we use that opportunity to all come together to do something bigger, to collaborate more, to work with endangered species in a more coordinated way, so that conservation organizations look at herpetoculturists as part of the solution to endangered species management and
I think we
protection.
have to be, because the zoos don't have enough money. They don't have enough focus. They don't have enough
Yeah,
funding. They're, and the zoos don't be. Most zoos don't work well with people who are individual collectors. But the individual collectors get all this data on all these species,
exactly.
and they, if they would share back and forth, we could advance everything. It's the same thing with science. If people start to share science, science goes further. But if you keep it to yourself and you keep it quiet and you want to keep a secret, then it's never the same.
Yeah, so just how can we bring together people through a reptile show, but do more?
Mhm.
That's the kind of show or the kind of idea or concept that I think that's just ripe for someone to go out and create something new. Brian Barczyk is
Mhm.
on his way with Animal Con. We'll see if
Mhm.
that gains momentum. But that's certainly a place where that could happen. The Turtle and Tortoise Preservation Group, which I'm a part of, is a great example of turtle and tortoise keepers getting together every year for a series of talks all about turtle and tortoise care. And it's fantastic. It's wonderful. It's just turtles though, tortoises. And how do we unite even more? I think we're on the way. I like to think positively and think about how we can work together
Mhm.
to work with conservation agencies as opposed to working to change laws so that there are no laws.
Right. If we could band together like all those people,
Yeah,
that would be good.
it would be awesome. And I really think that's what I like best about our monthly show model is
Mhm.
that we can get together as a community. And right now at this point, I can go to the show to see you and connect with you and people like Seth Hurst and
Mhm.
Mike Novi of Rainforest Junkies
Mhm.
and just talk about this stuff.
Mhm.
And the last show I was at, a lot of people were talking about the Egyptian tortoise endangered species ruling. And that is what I like about them. That's what works about that monthly model. But yeah, how can we capitalize that on that even more?
Mhm.
I don't know. Don't know what it is. I would love to have a herp society in Northeast Ohio again. Um, a guy, Dr. Marty Rosenberg, was a professor at Case Western Reserve, and I think he started NOAA or was one of the first people. I hadn't seen him in a long time. Um, I saw him walking around the last show in Medina,
Wow.
and I wanted to stop and say hi to him and introduce myself and say, Dr. Rosenberg, I used to do Science Olympiad, and remember when you used to bring all your reptiles down to Ohio State 30 years ago? I was one of those 13-year-olds that was memorizing all the names of the reptiles. So I just thought it was really cool to see him there. He really started reptile shows in Northeast Ohio, and it was just great to see him know that he's still around. He looked
Mhm.
great.
That's awesome. So we draft him as president of the new association, or do we draft Two Turtle Tom?
Yeah, you know, I will serve if called. Yeah, I mean, I think I guess what I'm really sick and tired of is the only time we get together and really start to talk about advancing the hobby together is when it's at risk and when it's threatened. And I just want to talk about the positive things that we can do to work together and be excited about that stuff instead of being reactionary towards, you know,
Yep. Having
proposals that
been
will affect us.
part of many societies and groups together, the ones that are most successful have an outside enemy that's
Yeah.
things right with.
Yeah. Well,
They get together, and when those societies
tribalism.
that don't have someone to push them into a
Hate
tribe
on.
don't
Yeah.
seem to get, they don't go as well. And so I don't know what that is. I guess I probably should. I've got a background in psychology and sociology, but nonetheless, it's sad that
Yeah.
I'm talking about this with urgent care, talking about this with other different things that I've been involved with, and it's just like until we're under attack, we're all on our own, and then when we get
Yeah.
under attack, it's too late. You
Yeah.
you need to make those connections and grow that community beforehand. So that's good.
Exactly. Yeah. So it'll be exciting to watch your show grow
Mhm.
as you visit other shows and you get
Mhm.
to learn more about other shows. I think you'll be able to kind of pick fun ideas
Mhm.
that you could possibly bring back to our shows. Maybe.
Yep, that's what I intend to do. And that's a way for me to go ahead and stop buying so many reptiles and,
Yeah.
and amphibians and what
Yeah.
have you, because then I don't know, like your trees, you don't have they don't move, and you could go see them at any show.
You don't
But at
have
the
to
same
feed
token, it's
them
also a
really.
way to get the community together. Because I go to show, and then I see some of the same people at different shows, and then you get a community, and then they introduce you to other people at the show, and the web creates bigger and bigger and bigger, and the ripple gets bigger and bigger. So that's what I'm hoping to do. That the ripples get bigger and bigger, kind of like I said on the live show last week when we were celebrating the 1 year. That my goals for 2023 to 2024 are to make the show bigger, to get more, to do more, to get further ahead, to do more stuff. So that I can get people involved and to get it so that it's not just me doing the stuff. So that maybe we got Western reptile show reporter is an Eastern a whatever that go from place to place. Not that I want someone to take my job, but there's plenty of shows to go to. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Not that I'm actually getting paid for this. I mean, this is a hobby.
Yeah. Well,
I've got my day job anyway, so which I
yeah.
love it as well. So I'll never give that up either. But
You could have correspondence.
yes, that's you see, I could call them correspondents, have them come in, and then have them call in, have them recommend people for the live show, and the live show
Yeah.
can go to everywhere. You're starting to get. I'm feeling this Bill vibe again here. By the way, for those who don't know, Bill Strand is the headmaster of the Chameleon Academy and my co-host for the weekly show, but a troublemaker from all the other parts who just gets us all involved, gets us all ginned up about stuff, and gets us doing stuff. And it's all good, but you start to think about all the time you spend doing the things that he would like to do. I mean, one time he told me he'd love to be the reptile show reporter, but it has time to go to all these shows and
Exactly.
and report on them. So he's living vicarious through me. So that's what he actually said that. So I'm like, wait a minute. Hey, that's not what the plan was here. But that's okay because I'm loving it anyway. So it doesn't matter. Whoever wants to live vicariously through me, you're welcome to join the show, to like and subscribe to all the different YouTube channels, the Instagram channel, and the Facebook, which I started every day now, 4 days a week. I'm going to be putting stuff on the on all three of those venues. It's the attendees, it's the show itself, it's the vendors, and of course, it's the pets. So those are the big four. And so we're going to continue to talk about those and do what we can.
Awesome.
So, any final thoughts?
No, I'm just excited to see where you go, what you find, who you meet.
Okay, that's great. And I'm excited to see how your channel grows. It seems like it's growing all the time. I peer in from time to time. And I appreciate that you changed your day when I changed mine because you picked the day in between mine and Bill's, and
Yeah,
and my work schedule caused it create havoc for all of us. But
no
that was really
problem.
nice that you were able to do that, and I think that all of us grow together, and as long as we're talking about things and advertising each other, it'll keep going.
Please join our Facebook group, Reptile Show Reporter, pictured here. Thanks.